Frosty Screams. Chapter 1. Arrival in the White Desert. Clara Martin stared out of the helicopter window, watching the endless icy desert pass below. The sky was grey and the wind whipped thick snow into the air. Antarctica was merciless, and the icy wind rattling the helicopter's hull intensified the oppressive feeling of isolation. Clara was an experienced detective, but this case was different. Several people had vanished without a trace at a remote research station, and only bones had been found, mutilated, disfigured, and arranged in a way that made no sense. As the helicopter touched down on the snow-covered runway of the station, Clara was gripped by a deep sense of mistrust. She grabbed her thick grey jacket and scarf and stepped out into the biting cold. Ahead lay the research station, a small collection of dark buildings set against the endless snow. The station manager, a gaunt man named Dr. Henriksen, greeted her with a quick handshake. His face was drawn, and dark circles were visible under his eyes. "It's worse than we thought," he whispered as he led her inside. "We still have no explanation for what happened here." Chapter 2. The Last Sign of Life. The inside of the station was as cold and impersonal as the icy environment outside. Clara followed Henriksen through empty corridors, lined with old pipes and blinking lights. They reached a small meeting room where a file awaited them. It contained records of the missing people, scientists, technicians, a pilot. But nothing indicated what had happened to them. The reports were incomplete, as if the researchers had started to document something and were then abruptly interrupted. "Something is out there," one of them wrote in a hastily scribbled entry. "It watches us. We are not alone." Clara continued flipping through the file, her stomach tightening. No clear pattern emerged, just vague hints of a threat they could not name. "We found Dr. Reinhardt's remains," Henriksen suddenly said, his voice breaking. "Just his bones." They were wrongly arranged. Clara looked at him. "Wrong? I can't explain it. It was as if someone had deliberately placed them." Chapter 3. The First Clues. The next morning, Clara stepped out into the biting cold, accompanied by Henriksen and another researcher, Dr. Novak. They had bundled up to withstand the relentless cold. Ahead lay the path to the spot where Dr. Reinhardt's remains had been found. The snow crunched under their boots, and the wind mercilessly whipped at them. When they finally arrived, a gruesome sight awaited them. The bones were arranged in a strange spiral pattern on the ground. No blood, no signs of a struggle. Just bones, pale against the snow, like a grisly piece of art. Clara knelt down and studied the scene. "What could this mean?" she asked. Dr. Novak avoided her gaze. "I have no explanation. It almost looks ritualistic, but..." Clara ran her flashlight over the bones. She couldn't make sense of it, but one thing was certain. This was no ordinary murder scene. Chapter 4. Voices in the Snow. Back at the station, the tension was palpable. Clara conducted interviews with the remaining station members, but no one seemed to tell her the full truth. Some avoided eye contact. Others admitted they had heard strange noises at night, voices speaking to them in the wind, shadows moving out of the corner of their eyes. In the following night, Clara herself was awakened by the noises. A deep, threatening hum came from outside. She hastily dressed and grabbed her flashlight. As she pushed open the door, the wind blew icy cold against her face. The snow was thick and the moon barely visible behind the clouds. In the blizzard, she faintly made out the outline of a tent that had been pitched at the edge of the station. But the tent was torn, as if something large had burst through it. Inside, nothing but scattered equipment and a trail disappearing into the snow. Chapter 5. The survivors lie. In the morning, Clara gathered the survivors. She knew someone knew more than they were admitting. Her questions were sharp, her voice demanding, but the answers remained evasive. Dr. Novak was particularly reticent, and Clara felt he was hiding something from her. "Do you know what's really happening here?" she asked him when she cornered him alone in an empty room. Novak avoided her gaze, his hands trembling slightly. There are things one cannot understand. We found something deep in the ice. It's been there for thousands of years." "What did you find?" "A structure, something not of this world." Chapter 6. An enemy without a face. That night, another member of the station disappeared. No trace, no clue as to how or why. Clara felt the pressure mounting. Everyone in the station was a potential suspect, and the knowledge that an unknown entity lurked outside made the situation unbearable. She knew she needed answers, and fast. Chapter 7. The Discovery in the Ice. The next day, Clara and two of the survivors set out for the secret discovery Novak had mentioned. Deep in the ice lay a structure, appearing as a massive black mass, frozen for eons. A faint bluish light shimmered beneath the ice, and the air around them was colder than before. "This is it," Novak whispered. "This is what we found." Clara could not comprehend what she was seeing. It was not human, and it pulsed as if it had its own consciousness. Chapter 8. The Revelation of Horror. That evening, the true horror was revealed. As one of the survivors tried to flee, the monster appeared. It was a dark, formless being, its surface covered with the distorted heads of its victims. The faces, integrated into the entity, stared with empty eyes at Clara and the survivors. Screams echoed through the night. Clara watched in horror as the monster seized the fleeing man and pulled him into itself, his body disappearing, only the head remaining visible, another face merging into the mass of the entity. Chapter 9. The horror grows. The voices of the victims haunted Clara. She heard them in her dreams, felt them in her mind as the entity drew closer. The survivors fell into panic, and it became clear that no one was safe anymore. "It's coming," Novak whispered. "It's coming to take us all." Chapter 10. Cornered. Clara knew there was only one way to destroy the monster. She and the few survivors devised a desperate plan to trap the entity. They planned to overload the station's generator and destroy the monster with it. But as the entity approached, it began to manipulate their thoughts by using the voices of its victims. Clara struggled to remain clear-headed. Chapter 11. The Final Battle. The battle against the monster was both physical and mental. Clara attempted to overload the generator as the entity approached. The faces of her former colleagues called to her, pleading with her not to leave them. It was a nightmare of terror and madness. But at the last moment, she managed to trap the monster. The generator overloaded and exploded, the ensuing blast echoing through the station. Clara felt the shockwave throw her against the wall as sparks and smoke filled the room. The bright light of the explosion swallowed the darkness, and for a brief moment she believed she saw the entity dissolve. The heads trapped in its mass seemed to scream as the thing burst into flames and disappeared. Then there was silence. Chapter 12. Darkness and Ice. As the smoke cleared and the flames died down, Clara crawled from the wreckage. The generator was destroyed, and the station had almost completely collapsed. Only a few survivors were left, shocked and exhausted. The wind continued to howl outside, while the biting cold enveloped them. The snow quickly covered the ruins, and everything was quiet. Clara stumbled outside, Her thoughts scrambled and her body heavy with exhaustion. She did not know if she had truly destroyed the entity, but there were no further signs that it was still alive. Yet doubts gnawed at her. As she stared into the vast white emptiness, rescue arrived. A helicopter hovered on the horizon, and Clara felt a moment of relief, but also uncertainty. She had survived, yet the voices of the victims still echoed in her mind, as if they had become part of her own thoughts. The question that remained as the helicopter flew her away from the hell of Antarctica: was the monster truly defeated, or was a part of it still within her? The ending left a dark shadow over her as the endless cold of Antarctica disappeared beneath her and the world continued to move.